So today I want to go over a grenade focused Rafa build that's so incredibly strong that you can do 100% of the content of Borderlands 4 on Ultimate Vault Hunter rank 5 without ever shooting a single shot. And that doesn't mean you're taking a bunch of additional time without using any of your guns. This build kills everything incredibly quickly as well, and that includes bosses. And because of some of the really good grenade options we have, you also don't have to aim at all. You could legitimately play the entirety of the endgame just throwing grenades anywhere you want, and they will track to enemies and absolutely obliterate everything. So jumping into our skills, this is going to be a red tree focused build because there are so many incredibly strong ordnance synergies within this tree. And the action skill of the red tree are Peacebreaker cannons. They're just 2 cannons that pop out of your shoulder and deal damage. That also scales off of gun damage and action skill damage. The augment we're using is the really big part why this skill is actually going to be really good with the ordnance build, and we're using the insta-forward battle system as our augment, which your Peacebreaker cannons now also deal ordnance damage, and we deal increased ordnance damage when your action skill is active. Then on top of that, you can press F, which will throw your Peacebreaker cannons off of your shoulders and put them on the ground, where it'll be a stationary turret, but it will also have an additional chance to randomly throw out grenades that are copies of your grenades. So our action skill is going to be buffing us up, throwing more grenades that are basically the exact same grenades we throw, and just scaling off ordnance damage as well to make it do a ton of damage. And then the capstone we're using just turns our Peacebreaker cannons into shotguns, so they have pellet count and they have a chance to ricochet around. This is just because this does really good damage, and since our cannons are now going to be scaling off of our ordnance damage as well, mixed with this capstone, they're going to be doing really good damage by themselves. And next up, I think we should go into our specializations before we go more into our skill trees, because specifically one of our options is going to change some of our skill tree points. So first off, you're going to go 10 into Survivor, 10 into Brute to get the Gadgeteer, and then you're going to go 20 into this to be able to get the 2 bottom sockets. First off, the most important one, Full Spectrum Arsenal. Ordnance damage now benefits from increases to gun damage, so 50% of the increases to gun damage will now buff up our ordnance. So basically any gun damage increase, half of that will also go towards our ordnance. So that'll just massively increase our ordnance damage because we have a lot of different buffs we can get through that. Then Fragmentation Payload, which just gives our ordnance a 5% increased chance to critically hit and a 50% increased damage to critical hit damage. And if you can get a good roll on some of your grenade mods, you can actually get more crits. So that's also really good. And then depending on how many specialization points you have a few different options of things to go into. First off, if you don't have a ton of points, pick up Tripwire, which reduces your ordnance cooldown whenever action skill is activated. This won't happen a ton of the time, but it'll happen enough to make this worthwhile to actually put on until you get more points. But once you get more points, you can put 20 into Brute, which will riddle you this. When you deal gun damage, you increase your gun damage, stacks up to 50 times, so 50% increased gun damage. Now our action skill, so our Peacebreaker cannons, will stack this up, and because it's pellets, every one of the pellets gives another stack. So you'll stack this up very quickly when your action skill is active, just giving you gun damage, which will buff up our Peacebreaker cannons, but then gun damage also gives us ordnance damage increases. And then as you get more and more points, the next thing you're going to want to go for is 10 into Runner, 10 into Sharpshooter to get 1 into Daredevil, which will give you the Now with Caffeine socket, reduces action skill cooldown whenever a rep kit is activated. And because of the rep kit I'm using, we want to use it all of the time, and we want to be able to have our action skill up as much as possible. So this is a really good change. This is actually a change I just very recently made. So some of the footage you'll see I'm not actually using this, but this will be incredibly strong because the more you can have your action skill up, the more damage you're going to be dealing, the more grenades you can throw out, because our action skill will actually throw out grenades itself as well. But you will need a lot of specialization points for this. Go and farm contracts if you need more specialization points, but the rest you're just going to put into Gadgeteer for more ordnance cooldown rate. But then that brings us to our passive nodes. So starting off, we have increases to gun damage. This will just increase our Peacebreaker cannon and some into our grenades. We have whenever Rafa critically hits an enemy, your action skill duration is restored. Just our Peacebreaker cannons with our capstone that turns it into a shotgun. We'll make sure this is always proc because they will always crit at least 1 pellet when shooting something. Then we have whenever Rafa's shields breaks, after being fully recharged, you spawn a free grenade. And if you have a grenade mod equipped, use that grenade instead, so it'll just throw out a free grenade. We have 1 point into giving us damage reduction when our overdrive is active. This is just to get lower into the tree, but it is pretty pretty nice for some more damage reduction. Then we deal increased damage based upon our shield. The higher the shield, the more damage increase we're getting. And then it's doubled when our shield is at full capacity. So this will just be a pretty big damage increase, at least earlier on in fights. Then we're going down to the left tree. And then next up, we have our indirect projectiles deal increased damage. This will be anything from our Peacebreaker cannons. This will be grenades. Pretty much all the damage we're dealing will be increased by this. Then we have all indirect projectiles deal bonus incendiary damage, and that's doubled if it's already dealing incendiary damage. So this will just give us some pretty massive damage increases at all times. Then lateral plinking, your indirect projectiles can now also ricochet. Then we're going to the middle tree, and our ordnances now deal bonus damage of our current gun's element. And this is going to be really important. You're going to want to have a bunch of different guns with different elements, so more specifically a couple Maliwan guns, to be able to change the elements of what enemies you're going against. So if you're going against, say, one of the vault bosses that has shielding and then flesh health, you want to make sure to have a weapon in your hands that does shock damage and then switch it to do incendiary damage, depending on what health type you're going against. Then finally, we have a 5 into an overdrive skill. Rafa deals increased splash damage while overdrive is active. Pretty much all grenades, or most of them, deal splash damage. So this will just be some pretty big damage increases for grenades. Then we're going over 12 points into the blue tree. We're just putting 5 into the thrill for increased fire rate. It doesn't really matter what you do in this first tree because nothing really affects us much. But then we have 5 points into his kill skill. Whenever Rafa kills an enemy, he gains increased ordnance cooldown rate for a duration. So just massive ordnance cooldown rate. And if you're in anything where you could just keep killing enemies, the vast majority of bosses have ads, and any other content, you're going to be able to keep this up 100% of the time. Then our additional points are whenever Rafa throws a grenade, we gain increased action skill cooldown rate. So this will just always be up because we'll always be throwing grenades. But that brings us to our gear, and to make this build incredibly strong, you're going to need some specific things, but you don't really need anything specific for weapons. The main thing you're going to want, like I mentioned, is Maliwan weapons where you can switch the elements, so you can just switch to that weapon and have 2 different elements. So I've been using this Maliwan, which just has shielding and incendiary as its 2 elements. So a lot of bosses, a lot of enemies you're going to be facing will just have shielding and flesh health, so I can easily switch between those just on the one weapon to get that massive bonus damage based upon the weapon's element we have in our hands. Now, another weapon you can go for is any weapon with the Torg license part that can have these sticky gyro jets. Now, depending on what type of weapon it is, the increase for the explosions, depending on how many gyro jets are on the target, will be dependent on the type of weapon it is. So this weapon here has a 13% increase for each sticky I would put on the target. Some weapons will only have like 3%. So if you can get a roll that's like 13% like this, that'll be really good for a more advanced grenade mechanic that will essentially allow you to like insta-kill bosses very easily. But that brings us to the most important part of the build, the grenade. Now, there are a bunch of grenades that are just going to be really strong with this because it's so strong, but the best I have found for general content, basically everything you're going to be doing, is a swarm grenade. When it hits something, it blows up and multiplies, and it does this a couple different times. So it basically splits and then it'll split again because of the Merv grenades, and they're all tracking targets. And the only thing you can really roll is the third roll on this. You can get like cooldown reduction, you can get increased damage. The best thing you're gonna want is for the 25% chance to deal critical damage. So it's basically just 25% critical strike chance, which we already have some critical strike chance. So critting a bunch will just deal a lot of additional damage. But pretty much any swarm grenade is gonna be good because, like I mentioned, only that one roll can change. It'll just track targets, multiply, deal tons of damage. If you're against any boss that's not a vault boss, this will absolutely destroy those bosses. Vault bosses, it bugs out in some of the fights, so it'll still work for vault bosses. It just won't be near as strong. So some other grenades that are really good, you have the Chamurki, which continuously homes in on a target. Now, essentially what this does is it tracks targets, but it'll continuously, for basically the duration of the grenade, which I don't know how long it is, it'll continuously just essentially reproduce itself, so it doesn't go away after it explodes on the target and deals the additional damage. So specifically against single targets, against bosses, if you're farming just single bosses, it's quite good on. This can still bug a little bit on vault bosses as well. Any order grenade does that, but this can generally be better on a boss that doesn't move around a lot. If the boss is jumping around like crazy, it'll be worse. But if a boss is more stationary, doesn't move around a lot, this thing will just keep replenishing itself and do even more damage than the swarm grenade can do. So this is a good option for single target. it. Now the option that will allow you to just insta-kill bosses is the fire pot. And essentially all this grenade does is it kind of bounces around and spawns all these little stickies that are basically just Torg gyrojet stickies. So it throws out all these stickies that then go and track to targets. But if there's a bunch of targets, it won't just go against a boss, it'll just go and hit everything. But if you're going against a boss that's basically the only thing there, all of these stickies will go and hit the boss. And these stickies deal incredibly high damage at a baseline, but what's really strong about this is that these stickies are still considered Torg stickies. So if you get a weapon with the Torg sticky effect on it that gives increased damage per sticky on the target, what you can do is just throw out a bunch of these fire pots, get all of the stickies to go on the target, have that weapon in your hand, and then either reload it or switch its fire mode, which will both cause the explosion of sticky gyrojets, and that will buff up the damage of the fire pot stickies. And the fire pot stickies deal absurd amounts of damage, and you'll see this in the footage. I'm essentially able to insta-kill vault bosses, which have the most health of any enemy in the game. So you can essentially insta-kill any enemy in the game using a combination like this, but again, only super strong against singular targets. Now, the other really important piece of gear is your class mod, because you're going to want the Grenazerker, which whenever Rafa throws a grenade or T-tier weapon, he throws an additional one. So now, anytime we throw a grenade, it just throws two. This also includes when we use our action skill and throw it on the ground, where it has a chance to throw out more grenades. That will also throw out more grenades. This also applies to any skills that can spawn grenades. So when our shield breaks and throws that free grenade, that will also throw two. So you're essentially just doubling the damage you could do because you're doubling your grenade. So it's incredibly strong. This can also have some really good rolls, specifically the increase to the bonus damage we get of our weapon's element, because that's essentially just adding a ton of additional damage based upon a percentage of the damage we're already dealing. So getting more points into that is very strong. But then we have our rep kit. The main thing you're going to want on this is Go-Go Gadget. On use, grants increased ordnance cooldown rate by 50% for 6 seconds. Our grenades will just keep coming back more quickly. I got a really good roll on getting Enrage as well, where we deal increased damage but take more damage, but 30% increased damage on everything is pretty massive. And as you can see, it's only level 41 rep kit, so it might take a while to get a roll this good, but it's still a very good roll. For our shield, I am using Fireworks, so on kill spawns missiles at home and on nearby targets. That actually is really good. We also have multiple other effects that will do that. Another one of the effects is on armor segment break. This will spawn even more missiles. Just based on the shield and killing things, we'll be spawning tracking missiles everywhere that'll be tracking things just like our grenades. But then also one of the firmware we're using, which is Get Throwing, the third rank, whenever we throw our grenades, it has a chance of spawning homing missiles as well, which are essentially the same things that we already get from Fireworks. So we have 3 different effects that'll also be spawning homing missiles. So you'll just see tons of homing missiles with your homing grenades, which is just really cool. And for your enhancement mod, I don't really think there's anything that does much for this build. You can get one that say has like gun damage increase, that'll increase your damage a bit. You really don't have to worry much about your enhancement effect. Unless you want to use your weapon on top of just throwing the grenades, then just use whatever enhancement you want for the weapon you like using. And for our firmware, we went over Get Throwing, increases ordnance damage, increased splash radius, and then it just can spawn these homing missiles when we throw grenades. Then we're putting 2 into Gadget Ahoy, so ordnance cooldown duration is reduced and ordnance damage is increased. So you're definitely going to want these firmwares. They add quite a lot of damage and just power increases. Just everything about this build is so incredibly strong and so easy to use. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.